This is the Amidon Planet Podcast, episode 57. I'm your host, Joel Amidon. Thank you for joining me on this never-ending quest to figure out how to teach better. Today on the podcast is someone who's thinking about how to teach better, and that is Dr. Erica Halverson. So I threw it out there. I saw that she had a book coming out, and I was so excited. It's called How the Arts Can Save Education, Transforming Teaching, Learning, and Instruction. Send an email saying, hey, do you want to come on the podcast and talk about your new book? And she, seriously, minutes, hours, very quickly replied back, yes, that'd be great. And I was like, ooh, that's great. And then when can we do it? And she threw out some dates, and one of them was the day before my birthday. So I'm like, ooh, I get to release this podcast with Erica Halverson talking about her new book on my birthday. Can't think of a better gift. So I was blessed in having the conversation. I know you're going to enjoy it if you're listening to this podcast. If thinking deeply about teaching, that's what Erica does, is she thinks deeply about teaching, learning, students, the arts, and thinking about how these practices and things can be brought into the world of education for like a reset, and let's rethink about what are we talking about here with regards to teaching and learning and education in general. So she's got a book. It just got released, and I'm going to offer a disclaimer. You're going to hear some things that are going to pique your interest, and we're not going to cover a fraction of the book. And I just saw a fraction of it, and I'm excited about the fraction just as I saw. And now I'm excited that my book is on the way. And if you want to order it, there'll be links in the show notes. There's no way that you can gain the whole value of the book in just this conversation. So go ahead. Go to the link, purchase it. If you want, go to your local bookstore. We talked about Square Books, or I talk about Square Books all the time. Erica talked about A Room of One's Own. That's in Madison, Wisconsin. Support those local booksellers. Go get her book. And again, it's How the Arts Can Save Education, Transforming Teaching, Learning, and Instruction. It just came out. I'm excited about it. I'm excited about this conversation. Let's not delay anymore. Here is my conversation with Dr. Erica Halverson on her book, How the Arts Can Save Education, Transforming Teaching, Learning, and Instruction. Erica, how are you? Thank you for coming on the Amidon Planet podcast. And I already said it, but how are you?
I'm great. I'm delighted to be on Amidon Planet today. That is a great metaphor for the world that we're going to live in for the next 45 minutes. As you probably saw in the book, I create learning environments that also have metaphorical frames around them, because I'm a big believer in setting the tone and setting the stage for people to know that we're going in to participate in something that might be a little different than they're normally used to. So Amidon Planet is a great metaphor, and I'm delighted to be on it.
That's right. When I think about like the formation of a planet, it's like twirling. It's like some gases and things like coming together, and like right in the infancy of Amidon Planet, there was Erica right there, like to help like point out ideas, help me like think about like big things. And you were on my dissertation committee, and so I give this speech often. I like talk about who's the role on a dissertation committee, and I talk about you and how you would take an idea and hold it and like look at it and think deeply about it, and someone else's idea, and like treat it with care, but then also say like, this needs work. And like I remember exiting your office once and be like, oh my gosh, am I going to do this? But like, that was the best thing that anyone could ever done, is like, tell me how it is. Tell me like, hey, this thing needs some work. And that led to much better work coming out. And I wouldn't be where I am today without you. So I greatly appreciate you and how you approach just people that care about education. So, and that's why we're here today.
That's an awesome thing to say. Thank you so much.
So, we were talking before this, and I was like, man, we should probably hit record, because we're going to be, and because you're a busy person. So let's give a little bit of background. Can you give a little self-introduction of who the great Erica Halverson is?
Sure. So currently I'm a professor, and I'm the department chair of the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. This is my 16th year as a faculty member here at UW. My PhD is in something called the learning sciences, which is an interdisciplinary field in education that's concerned with questions like, what does it mean to know and learn stuff? How do we know what learning looks like? How do we design learning environments that take advantage of what we understand about knowing and learning? Typically, we take both kind of a cognitive science perspective on that. So what's going on, quote unquote, in people's heads and among people's heads as we're knowing and learning. Yeah. And then a social and cultural and historical perspective as well, right? So saying, what does it mean to think about learning as a concept invested within social networks, communities, historical ideas? So I have a PhD from the learning sciences from Northwestern University. And I'm also a trained theater artist and community arts activist. So I currently run a community arts outreach program in Madison called Whoopin' Soccer. And a lot of the book uses my experiences in Whoopin' Soccer as a foundation for understanding how teaching and learning and the design of learning environments writ large can be different.
Nice. And then you captured all these ideas in a book. So, and that's kind of the impetus for why we've came to have this conversation today. So how the arts can save education, transforming teaching, learning, and instruction. So how did this come to be?
Whew. So it's been a pretty long effort and long story. I mean, I think I always knew that I wanted to write a book. And that sounds very, I don't know, extra. But, like many of us who had lives before becoming academics, I think we stepped into academia because we thought we had more to say beyond just being a practitioner of the things that we believed in. So when I went to graduate school, I had started and was running another community arts outreach program in Chicago, which is currently called Playmakers Lab, but was called Barrel of Monkeys when we started it. And I was engaged in the work of bringing joy to learning environments with elementary school age kids through the arts. And I didn't really know anything about learning or teaching or children, for that matter, other than that I had just been one. And we were doing this work and kids seemed to be stuff. And the kids who teachers would repeatedly point out didn't typically learn stuff, or at least didn't typically demonstrate that they had learned stuff, were stars in our program. And that was interesting to me. Yeah. And so I went to graduate school to try to get smarter about that. And then along the way, as probably you know, and many people that do this work know, you sort of get caught up in the cycle of academia, where you then become the kind of person, we were talking about this before we started, become the kind of person who writes academic articles as the mechanism to communicate what you know, which is intellectually really challenging and engaging, and part of the game of being an academic, but is not super rewarding in terms of communicating what you know to a broader audience.
Right.
So all of that has been swirling around in my head for 20 years. And about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to figure out how to take the work I do as a practitioner and the ideas that I've had as a researcher and my, I think by now, pretty vast knowledge of big ideas in education research. And I'm ready to put that all into one manageable, readable, hopefully engaging package.
I would say entertaining
package. One exciting, entertaining package. And if anybody has seen the cover of the book, which I can talk a little more about, the cover is also designed to communicate some of those ideas. And so I wrote a sample chapter and actually did not start with the beginning. And I don't know if you've talked to other book authors and whether they've told you kind of about their process at all. No. But I think that actually turned out to be a really good move for me, which is I started with kind of a manageable piece of the work rather than trying to be like, in the beginning there was, right? I just said like, here's an idea I know I want to talk about, which is what is now chapter 4 of the book, which is the chapter about teaching and about improvisation as a model for good teaching. So I started with that. And then I found a publisher. And I did that mostly for my own accountability, because I knew that if the only thing I had to be accountable to was myself, it would never happen, because life gets in the way. You know, you take on other professional responsibilities. You become department chair in the middle of a pandemic.
There you go.
And you're like, here are 80,000 other things that I need to be doing instead of this. So I had a contract which kept me to some set of deadlines, which was really useful. And I wrote a whole book, and then I gave it to my husband, the also brilliant academic Rich Halverson.
Yes.
Also a member of Amazon Planet. And he said, great, this is a good start. You need to write this whole thing again. And at first I was like, oh, hell no. I wrote a book. Are you crazy? But he, like you said, you know, the kindness that I offered you, my husband offered me the same kindness of saying, if what you're trying to do is communicate these ideas in engaging, readable package, you're not there yet. And I can tell you all the reasons why I think that's true. So I wrote the whole thing a second time. And that process sort of finished off in maybe this past April. And then kind of from April till now was more kind of production-y stuff. So the kind of text of the ideas had been pretty well nailed down by kind of last April.
That seems fast. I mean, between April to like, hey, I'm going to have a book arrive at my doorstep. And that seems really, I don't know. Is that, was that fast?
I don't know. I mean, I will tell you that if at that point it felt slow to me, not because at that point I was impatient.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, great. I wrote the whole thing. I wrote the whole thing again.
Yeah.
Now I feel good and I'm ready. And there was sort of this, it was almost like a gestational, you know, like a third trimester or something, where you were like, I cooked this baby. Now I'm ready for it to be born. Yeah.
Editor says, hey, check these proofs. I'm like, I've seen them.
Yeah. I'm like, I know. So I would say from the time, you know, I wrote the first draft of the first chapter in summer 2019. So, you know, maybe let's say May of 2019 to October of 2021 for sort of the full production cycle.
Yeah. Well, I want to start actually with the chapter, because the chapter that you just pointed out was the one that you wanted, is actually the chapter that stood out to me the most. And let me tell you why. It had a little story behind it. So here at the University of Mississippi, sometimes there's folks that want in the program, they might want their units or their lessons scripted almost to the T of like what should happen. And for me in my methods class, I'm thinking like, well, we're doing these messy open-ended tasks where we give them and we're like, here's all these different ways you could approach it. You can use manipulatives, you can use like all these different tools in order to represent, using some of your language, there we go, make some art here, represent like you're thinking about how you might attack this problem. You can acting it out, you can like create a drawing, whatever, like, or use symbols, whatever. And so like, if that's open, how can you script that? Like a kid might do something totally like unexpected, use some, something that in the classroom in a way that you would not even understand. And like, and, nothing's, unique to me, but I was like, this is not a play. This is improv. This is, this is whose line is it anyway? Like, oh yeah, I've seen that. Like that's what we're talking about. We're creating this situation. And I know I know I'm not the first to think that, but it's like trying to convince, like, so how do you even think about this in the world of it? And then here we go. Here's a whole chapter on thinking about improv. Why improv? What, like, I don't know, not that you need academic up, but like, what's the argument for improv?
I just actually gave this spiel yesterday. I ran a professional development workshop for teaching artists, awesome. Mostly dancers. And an interesting thing about my work now is I have kind of two primary audiences. One is artists who want to be teachers. The other are teachers who I believe need to incorporate art making practices and processes in order to be successful teachers. And I say that because it's the same work, but the assets that those two groups are bringing are very different, right? So artists tend to be pretty confident about the ways that they can work in the classroom, but much less confident about sort of teachery stuff, right? I don't know a lot about, how kids learn. I don't know a lot about, how I might measure stuff. I don't know, a lot of the practices, question answering practices, right? And so some of the work of improvisation is about explaining to artists how the rules of improv give you some of those structures. With teachers, on the other hand, and pre-service teachers like both of us work with, right. They come in much more confident about teachery stuff, but they tend to be very risk averse in terms of setting up classrooms where unexpected things might happen. They very much, I think, want to control the room so that they don't leave anyone behind. So it's done for a good reason, but right. Often the result is what you're saying, which is, no, I need to control every aspect of this. And so the main message that I give to both groups is the concept that scaffolding risk-taking is the primary move for any successful learning environment. And I'll say a little bit more about that. But first I'll say my belief is no one can learn anything if they're not willing to be wrong. And no one is willing to be wrong if they don't take a risk. And that applies to learners, but it also applies to teachers, right? Teachers have to be willing to take risks. Teachers have to be willing to set up situations where they might be wrong, or where the collective knowledge construction that happens among teachers and students and the tools that they're working with might take some funny pathways before you get there. So that the learning path isn't, I'm a teacher with information, I give it to a student, and then they reproduce that information in a way that tells me that they've taken in what I've given them. That pathway is a false pathway to learning. And so a lot of the work that I do with pre-service teachers is not only explaining to them what scaffolding risk-taking is and how to use it in their classroom, but I also scaffold their risk-taking. So we spend a lot of time in my classrooms setting up the conditions for pre-service teachers to be able to take their own risks, and then helping them understand how those same strategies can apply when they are the instructional leader in their own teaching space.
Okay, so what does this look like? So I guess, some people, they're going to go get the book, they're going to read it for themselves, but like, let's whet their appetite a little bit. So like, what does that actually look like to do some of the things that you're talking about in using the arts?
Yeah. So, very practically, the first thing it means is that getting everyone in the learning environment to feel comfortable contributing is not a nice thing to do if there's extra, but a necessary precursor to dealing with complicated content. So, everybody poo-poos getting to know you activities. And I put that in air quotes. I know that no one else can see me but you. And I get why people hate that. Yeah. They hate it when it's done as a like, oh yeah, we're supposed to get to know each other. So here, give us two truths and a lie. Right? I mean, how many times have you had to say like, I have a dog.
That's right. I
have two children. I'm from New Mexico. Right. And then people may or may not guess it and sort of who cares. Right. Instead, I think of activities such as having a daily ritual where people contribute into the space something that is keeping them from being fully present. So acknowledging that it's hard to be in a learning environment, acknowledging that what we are asking of people is for them to bring their best selves, but we often don't give them an opportunity to reflect on why that might be difficult for them. So I begin every classroom, no matter what age of people, no matter how long we're going to be together, with some sort of opening ritual that asks people to acknowledge that it's difficult to be in a space and to acknowledge something that might be keeping people from fully participating. I also often have the kinds of warm-up games for people to play with one another that move us from all doing things together as a way to get people comfortable with risk-taking. So even something as simple as a physical stretch, right? Being in a space, stretching our bodies together and moving our bodies as a mechanism for getting people comfortable, difficult things. Then often I'll move to something like a call and response activity where I may contribute something into the space and then everybody contributes something back. So there again, people are being asked to use their bodies and voices, but not as individuals in a response to something that I'm doing. And then slowly over time, moving toward activities where people are asked to give something of themselves that is their own original contribution. So that might look like a very sort of classic improv warm-up, which we just call pass the sound and movement, where you pick a sound and a movement. It could be your name, it could be nonsense, it could be a phrase, it could be anything from a single gesture of, a claw in the air to, a giant jump and stretching of your arms. And then everyone has to do it back. So eventually each person in the learning environment is contributing something unique of their own. But that takes time and it takes scaffolding. You can't just say to people, cool, do something hard in front of everyone.
Yeah.
Go, right? And that sounds so obvious, right, to experienced educators, but we don't set people up pedagogically to focus on the conditions for people to contribute. The assumption is that people will contribute. And when they don't, we tend to put that on that person. Oh, that kid doesn't know what's going on. Oh, that person is quiet. Oh, they're resistant, right? We turn that into a negative evaluation of the person rather than acknowledge that it's part of the design of the learning community to get people to a place where they are willing to contribute, knowing that they might, quote unquote, be wrong. And I don't mean wrong in the sense of like you asked what 3 + 4 was and someone said 9, right? I mean be wrong in the sense of offering an idea that contributes to something difficult and maybe having it be incomplete. Or as you said, maybe having it be something you've never heard before as a teacher, right? Where you go like, oh, where did that kid get that idea about like, this distributive property, right? They have the notion of distribution, but they have it in this different way. How can I use their concept of distribution to get us to the mathematically accepted definition of distribution rather than just say, no, that's not it. Who's next? But to get to a place where somebody even will offer that is part of the work of teaching.
Well, and when you talk about learning sciences before and thinking about like what does actually teaching and learning look like, and if people actually, and I don't know if sometimes you're talking to parents or things like that, or their kids struggling with something and they're just really distressed about that. But when you really think about what actually learning is, you have been pushed out to a point where I haven't done this thing before. I haven't learned, or I don't know this thing. And like, now I'm getting to play in this space where there's this struggle a little bit. And then you're actually learning something there. And so there is something but you're saying, you need to acknowledge that. And like, how do we get folks into a place where it's going to be this playground where there might be some misconceptions or some thoughts and things that might come out like, that in a day or two, you would not have wanted to say that, or better, or you have a better understanding of things. And so like, but you actually think about what learning is like, and teaching is living in that uncomfortable space. And so you just to have this, using this idea of improv, how do you actually like construct this space through what you've done? It's like, it's beautiful. It's it makes sense. But like when people think about some of their experiences, I think, I was successful in school and a lot of it didn't involve a lot of struggle. And so when it actually does happen, and like, I look back, like there was some very memorable experiences, but it was not like, that wasn't the norm. Right. And so you're kind of acknowledging like, that's a great space to be in, but you have to carefully construct it.
And yes. And that will allow us to take the concept of failure from a representation of a lack of doing something to part of the learning process, right? The idea that we have now that if you fail, or if a school is failing, or if, a teacher has a high percentage of kids who are failing, what we mean by that now is there is a lack of something. Oh, they didn't get the thing, whatever the thing is, right? I would prefer, and I think as you're saying, learning, if we really think about learning as a process, failing, i.e. not quite getting there, is actually a necessary part of constructing new knowledge. I mean, I've said to my own 15-year-old who is, for the first time, I would say, encountering class work and learning environments where she doesn't immediately know the answers right away, and where the teachers, luckily, are expecting of her to contribute new ideas as part of what it means to learn. And she's very frustrated with herself. And she's used to the gold stars. And, she's gone her whole schooling career with being told that being good in school means already knowing the answers. And I've said to her several times, which you can imagine as my 15-year-old child, she loves, I said, if you can already do it, why do you even school?
Right.
Like, if you already knew how to construct an argument about European history in the way that the humanities scholars who've developed this sort of college level, curriculum for high schoolers. If you already knew how to do that, what is school even for?
Right.
But it's an undoing, and it's an undoing not of her design, right? She's been in school long enough to know that getting it right, whatever that means, is the marker of learning. And that's really unfortunate. And, I'm on a campaign to flip that on its head.
All right. So what are some, and I'm skipping around here because I want to honor your time.
Yeah. Oh, we're good.
Okay. But maybe I did have this question. What does it not look like? So, some people might be like, great title. And then they don't dive any like this. Yeah. Art, this art's the way to go. And the arts. And so what are some cautions? Like, what does this not look like to use the arts in education?
That is a great question. And I think I'm actually going to read you what is kind of the opening paragraphs. I'm going to read you a couple of paragraphs from the introduction, because I think that is, first of all, a great question. And second of all, something that I've thought really deeply about. It's going to just take me a second to get there. But
as you get there,
I
did like how when I asked another question before, you did the yes and. I noticed that.
I did.
I appreciate that. A little improv.
And I will say as well that I struggled in writing the book to not have the first paragraph be what it wasn't about. And this is something I can thank my husband for, right? He's like, do not start a book with what your book isn't about. Like, I get why you need to do that close to the front, but you got to start with what the book is about. And then I understand the need. So I appreciate that you asked the question. Good call. But also, like me, you're like, well, how isn't this everything? You got to say what it is, but you got to say what it isn't. So this is from kind of the second page of the book. The age of accountability in education is losing its momentum. Education is in a time of profound change. We are increasingly aware of how learning outside of school provides life-giving opportunities for our most vulnerable kids. The arts, dance, theater, music, the visual arts, and the digital and design arts offer us a way to reimagine what good learning and teaching are, and how to design learning environments that work for all kids. The COVID-19 pandemic shut down schools and exposed ever-present inequities in education. And though it has been heart-wrenching for teachers, students, and families, the disruption has also offered us the opportunity to fundamentally rethink what education can be. Gloria Ladson-Billings, of whom Joel and I are both great fans,
big fans,
has called for a hard reset on education and for us to fundamentally reconsider the kind of human beings we want to produce. In this book, I will describe how the arts can save education by providing new models for learning that embrace the social, cultural, and historical assets that kids bring to the classroom. I will also share how an arts-based approach to teaching focuses on risk-taking as the most important aspect of a successful classroom. I offer a framework that leverages how arts practitioners do their work to design learning experiences for all subject areas. Throughout, I use my own arts organization, Whoop and Soccer, as a model for how to reframe learning as acts of metacognitive representation, identity development and collaboration, and lots of joy. Before we get started, I want to make a few things clear. This is not a book about arts education. There are many fine books on how to teach the arts, both in and out of schools, and I encourage you to read them all. What I am offering is something more. I use arts practices to fundamentally rethink what learning outcomes we should value, how we should teach, and how to design learning environments and experiences that can serve all kids. In my world, we are not teaching and learning the arts, The arts are teaching and learning. I will use the terms arts education, arts practices, and art making throughout the book. Across all of these, I am referring to the arts as a collective set of disciplines where people produce things. Those things can be physical artifacts like clay pots or short films, or they can be ephemeral performances like a music concert or improvised scene. Many of my examples are drawn from the performing arts because I've been performing my whole life. But this argument is inclusive of all forms where creative expression is involved. Okay, on with the show.
Just on a side note, I just, when I was reading this, the introduction, like I heard your voice and I heard it like, I mean, it's the way it's written is good. So the second draft, it was excellent. You did good.
That was the goal. I'm so delighted to hear you say that. You know, that was the goal, was to produce something that read like a person who you might want to hang out with and talk about these ideas was writing.
And the and again, you're always like a sense of excitement that you always carried in the classroom and stuff like that. You can kind of sense that in the reading as well. And that's great. I mean, like, and that is, you're offering like this, hey, here's some things to consider before you jump into this text. And then, so I guess what have been some of the, you've been on a little book tour here, right? Since
this is the beginning. This is the beginning, Joel. I gave a talk at the Wisconsin Book Festival on Saturday, live in front of humans, which was awesome. Nice. But like you said, the book just officially came out on Friday. Yeah. And so we're pretty early in the sharing journey, which is delightful.
Well, and I'm seeing, so like we just got done, you talk about Glory Lights and Billings. We just got done. We did a book club that we're doing for some professional development around Dream Keepers, Glory Lights and Billings, classic book. I think it's coming out for its third edition in the early 2022, maybe. But, thinking about this as a book of offering a vision for, what teaching can look like and what teaching we could be shooting for, and, little progress, but there still needs to be a lot of work done. And but thinking of your book also as something that offers a vision, and you even reference it in some of the thoughts and ideas about what the kind of the foundations of this book is, like about culturally relevant pedagogy and culturally sustaining pedagogy. And like, hey, these are some things that what it could look like if we really like take the roof off and really think about what this could look like. And so what I love about your book is that it is built off these experiences, that these are real experience. These are not some just, Erica sitting in the top of Ed Sciences writing a book and like never stepping foot in the class. This is actual, like, I've seen this done, and it can be done. And so, but I guess before we back up a little bit and say, like, what are some assumptions about teaching and learning that the ideas and practices described in the book are built on?
So I think there are, I would say, 3 big categories of ideas that I draw on. The first are ideas from cognitive science, and that really betrays my background as a learning scientist, where I started learning about learning from that perspective. I was an undergraduate theater major and thought I was going to be a professional actor. And so my first class, frankly, on education, in the social sciences, really was my first day of graduate school. So for me, cognitive science is kind of a ground floor. Particularly, I'm inspired by constructivism, constructionism, the sort of line of thinking in cognitive science that starts with the idea that all knowledge is built on pre-existing knowledge. So constructivism tells us that we build continuous understandings as humans, that we don't have floating concepts or information that get delivered to us whole from someone and implanted into our, memory hole.
Yeah. Yeah.
But rather, we are continuously updating and making sense of the world based on the experiences, the ideas, the understandings, the histories that we already have. And unfortunately, much of traditional teaching is not based on a constructivist understanding of learning. And just slightly more specifically, constructionism with a T is a branch of constructivism that the late, great Seymour Papert developed that extended the metaphor to the actual making of stuff. So Papert would say not only is all knowledge built on all other knowledge, but we acquire that through the actual construction of artifacts. So learners, that kind of learning is most effective when a person is physically creating something, whether that's, and that can be a digital thing, it can be a physical thing, it can be an ephemeral thing, but that the learning is within the making. So cognitive science. Then the second branch of ideas that I'm inspired by is the world of kind of multi-literacies, new literacies, progressive visions for what it means to be a literate human. So I'm not just talking about reading and writing text, although reading and writing text is one form of literacy, right? I'm talking about the consumption and production of ideas as the primary mechanism for how we make sense of the world. So scholars like Jim G., Michelle Noble and Colin Lancashire, Brian Street, the whole New London group, who advanced a vision for literacy that is much more expansive than phonics. That is, I think, in many education circles, fairly well accepted, although I'm sure, as you know, some of the curricular supports that we offer lag way behind the understanding that we now have about what it means to do literacy successfully. So I'm very inspired by the multi-literacies argument, and I have some extensive conversation about that. And then the third piece is what you mentioned, Joel, the world of culturally sustaining pedagogies, and what had initially been called culturally relevant pedagogy, but that Gloria and others have shifted to this concept of culturally sustaining, which begins to take account of the sort of local culture and youth cultural components of what it means to be a cultural human being. So culturally relevant pedagogy had focused most on sort of culture as an historical artifact, right? So what does it mean to be a member of an African-American community, for example? Or what does it mean, to be a Mexican-American person with linguistic and historical and cultural resources? But what Gloria and others noticed was that in our modern world, local culture and youth culture intermixes with historical cultures in really delightful and incredible ways that young people bring into the classroom, and that is the space where we need to be working. And sometimes that's called asset pedagogies, meaning moving from starting with the assumption that kids are missing stuff as the foundation for the design of learning environments, to beginning with what kids are bringing into the space as the foundation for how we design. And for my money, arts practices are those assets. Yeah. So, when we say culturally, what does it mean to be engaged in culturally sustaining pedagogical practice? I would argue what we mean is engaging in collective art making, And I would use those interchangeably.
Yeah, that was it. Because I did have Gloria on the podcast.
You did?
I did. It was fun. Oh my gosh, I was so nervous. Like,
I bet.
I mean, but she's great. But we were talking about the original book, The Dream Keepers, and she's talking about like, it was easier to do things at a younger grades, but she would have loved to do it at a little bit older grade because she saw like teenagers. They're like you said, producers. They're producers of culture. They're like not just receive. They are making, right. They're in the midst of making, and like it's almost like you're offering like, hey, how do we tap into that, or how do we provide them these environments to like make art and think about like how does that incorporate into what the kind of environments that we're creating for in our learning environments that we're creating,
and how do we validate the contributions that young people are making to our learning environments. And that applies to teenagers, but it applies to young children as well, right? I mean, I do a lot of, in my own practice, I do a lot of creative writing and performance with younger children, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. They also generate a lot of culture. They have ideas about the ways in which the popular cultural world applies and doesn't apply to them. And how they can express that through writing and performance. And frankly, how they can incorporate ideas that are typically thought of as transgressive. And in the book, you'll see one of the greatest triumph of this book is that there is an index line that says poop jokes /stories and with 3 separate references in the text. And I was like, oh, this is how you know I've written a good book. But scatological humor is transgressive. And my feeling is that should be part of what we allow kids to bring into a creative space, particularly if we can work together to produce something that values what they bring, but also generates something meaningful and delightful for a public audience. And it doesn't have to all be poop jokes. I mean, but who doesn't like that?
Yeah. See, now I'm really excited. I can't wait for that when this book arrives. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. In the index, it's great.
And whoever did the indexing, if you're out there, person who does the indexing for Teachers College Press, I would love to buy you a drink. Yeah, because you have done an outstanding job.
Outstanding job. Oh my goodness. So, and again, we're going to put links to the book in the show notes. I have show notes now.
You're fancy.
But yeah, we'll put links to the book. But then, so thinking about what are some key points, if someone, there's like, I'm going to get to it. I'm a teacher. I'm in the midst of things, but what are some key points that you would like somebody to walk away from this podcast knowing some, and teachers, and again, we kind of, on Amazon Planet, we think of teachers as, obviously educators that are in, K-12 classrooms, but also, as parents, we're teaching all the time or, in all sorts of different environments. Like, and you're thinking about all these environments too, when you're thinking about some of these places that you have influence over. So what are some key points that you'd want people to take away from this conversation?
Yes. So I think the big idea I'd like people to take away about learning is that, art making is a fundamentally representational practice, meaning that what we do when we make art is we are engaged in a cycle of using tools to share difficult concepts with external audiences. That's what we're doing. And that representational process is what we want kids to be doing in any discipline in school. Mathematics is a representational process. Mm-hmm. Some of our colleagues, I'm a fan of Noel Enyedy at Vanderbilt, who's written about mathematics as a recursive representational practice. Science is fundamentally a representational practice. So in terms of learning, I think thinking about how to engage learners in cycles of representation is a lesson we can take from the arts that applies across the board. In terms of teaching, I think this idea of scaffolding risk-taking as the core mechanism of what it means to be a successful teacher is the thing I would like people to take, and to think about that, the role for improvisation in scaffolding risk-taking. I think in terms of the design of learning environments, how do you design your teaching and learning spaces to embrace those big ideas? I see that work as cycles of conceiving, representing, and sharing, where you're focused on, okay, what are the ideas that I want to communicate, right? What are the conceptual understandings that are a core part of what it means to be in this learning space? How do I use the tools of this medium to engage in the representation of those concepts? And then when and how do I share those with external audiences as a mechanism for checking my own understanding and development? So I think those would be my three big takeaways. And throughout the book, I give specific examples of what each of those looks like, both within arts practices and in other disciplines that have brought in these kinds of practices into their own designs. Some of I know you're a big fan of Rico Gutstein, and some of his work is well represented in this space. It ends up looking quite similar. There's some folks doing really cool stuff with dance and science, thinking about the ways in which embodied movement helps us better understand certain kinds of scientific concepts. There's lots of work in the Indigenous teaching and learning community around the intersection of art making and science learning, particularly the visual arts. So there's lots of places where people can look for examples of how this looks in a learning environment.
Yeah, I mean, it just from other things that just sparked for me was like Chris Emden's work in science education.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, folks have not seen his work. I mean, I was thinking of when you talk about the tools of representation. And so thinking about, as teachers, how can we expand or represent, what counts, right, as representing the ideas that we're trying to, make within the classroom. And like Emden is making parallels between, in some of his books, I thought I had it here. Nope, not here. But he's talking about like the parallels between a cipher and like how scientists are building their arguments upon each other. And that's how we're building rhymes on each other and making those parallel. Or a rap battle is when, hey, here's my theory and I'm taking the data and put it this way. All right. So then I'm taking your words or your the way you're representing things or way you're seeing things with your theory. And I'm going to take my theory and throw it back at you. And it's kind of like a parallels with a rap battle. So Chris Emden's stuff is excellent that way. But also too, thinking about just that, I mean, think about just a question to ask in this is what counts as representations? And I just remember one of those light bulb moments I had as a first year teacher was some kid solved how to find a slope or how to find the equation for a linear pattern, right? So y equals mx plus b is what people always heard and think about, and like taking the points and plugging in the formula and stuff. And like, it was the same thing that I'd done as a student. I thought that was the only way. And all of a sudden someone's like, can I use a table to represent my thoughts? Or can I, and I was like, I never seen that. And it was just, I mean, and for like, was it a huge step? For me, it was, because like, I'd only seen it one way. And like, I'd only thought about like that a representation could only be one way. That just expanded my world just a little bit. So then it thinks like, well, what other representations count in this world? And so thinking about that, what are the tools of representation that we are providing access to as teachers, right? Or also too, acknowledging the risk-taking and valuing the risk-taking. Like, hey, like we were talking about before, they're on the edge of understanding and playing with some ideas and thinking like, hey, I acknowledge that you took a risk and maybe it didn't pay off, but that's advancing all of our thinking. The fact that you were willing to take a risk, that allows other people to take a risk. And I value that. And like to make it known that, hey, part of what we do in here in this space is we're going to take risks, and to make sure that it's acknowledged, and like, and that's a part of what we do. And like having a little bit of struggle is okay. And so I don't know, like that's just some things that popped in.
Now you're fired up.
I am.
I love it.
Man, this is great. I'm seeing a future book club with some teachers to think about these ideas coming up. So
yeah, please. And let me know if you want me to come and hang out with y'all. Cause that's like, as far as I can tell, the only reason to write a book is that you can put something in the world that serves then as the opportunity for a conversation.
And I was going to end with this, but like, I mean, that is it. I mean, the fact that you're willing to pour yourself into this book, people don't have access to hearing you talk about these things. Not everyone has access to you talking about these things in your classroom or participating in whooping soccer. And so the fact that we're willing to put it into a book, it's like, it's amazing. And again, that's what you're doing. You're sharing, you're taking a risk and putting these.
I am taking a risk. It's true. Risk. Thank you for acknowledging that. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. I mean, up until about a week ago, other than Rich, nobody had read this. And so I was like, what is this going to be like? And then scary for people to read it and scary for people to not read it.
Yeah. I mean, right? Put yourself out there with a title too. How can the arts save education? Hey, there you go.
And I had to fight for that title for that reason. Nice. Right? The publishers were like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah, I mean, yep, I am. I get it. It's bold, but like, why do it if you're not going to be bold about the way you communicate it?
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the risk. So, and you've shared some things about teaching, but I just wanted to, and I could share some things that I think is the best thing you do in your teaching, but what's the best thing? You were an experienced educator. What is the best thing you do to help your teaching? And again, you might've mentioned something, but go ahead and put the emphasis on it or bold it, whatever.
Yeah. I think two things. One, I think this acknowledgement that being in a learning environment is a challenging act of humanity, and that it is on the designer of the learning environment to provide opportunities for people to really engage with one another's humanity. So these rituals, I do those same rituals in all my classes. I don't care if my students are 50-year-old doctoral students or 8-year-old, emerging readers and writers. It is important. It is vital that we acknowledge one another's humanity as a part of what it means to do teaching and learning. So that's something that really matters to me. This is less of a serious one, but it is also really important to me that I offer as many different forms of participation as possible. And I don't mean that in a cheesy learning styles way. Right. I mean it in like, again, acknowledging that if we were all the same, or if the goal was for us all to be the same, we would be in a robot factory.
Right.
But actually, we're in a learning environment. Mm-hmm. And so that means I get to acknowledge that like Joel is really good at this thing. And so I'm going to lift him up as a teacher and a learner in this space to be able to contribute this particular feature. And that these two children who have been in the United States for a week may not be the first and the fastest to offer a pass the sound and movement, but right. What are they offering that can then become an integral part of this learning environment? Maybe they're the best, timekeepers I've seen. And that is a crucial part of what it means in a learning environment to be successful, is making sure you keep track of time, which I'm not good at. But, maybe that kid, from Iran who is really trying to figure out how to make his way in this classroom is like an ace timekeeper, and that becomes a significant way in which he contributes into the learning environment.
So I took a lot of classes from you. And so I'm going to put one more, that thing that I think is something you do. you play with ideas. And I remember like, and you allowed us to play with ideas. And I remember we were doing something where we went into a public space and just took notes on everything we were noticing. And I had a partner that I did that with. And then we were like, just supposed to code it and come up with something come up with a concept and that has feed. We came up with that we were in a Barnes and Noble coffee shop. We were taking notes, and we just noticed that people were having very serious, like private conversations that we could hear in the coffee shop. And when we talked about like having private conversations in public spaces, that was like the thing that we came up with like dimensions of it and everything. And like, you were like, yep, let's go with it. Let's what? And you just asked us very seriously. So like they were talking about like, you cheating on someone and like, blah, blah, blah. And like it got really, but it was, I mean, but the thing is like, it was like playing around with that idea that got us at this idea of like, well, what does it mean to come up with something from data? And like, it was like playing around, but it was, like the playful thing that allowed us to get at something that we needed to advance in our studies. And it was, I like that. I like that. It was a fun way to learn. And so it was, maybe we were making art, right? Maybe like,
yeah. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of the principles that I just described are embedded in that kind of practice, even though no painting was made, right? I mean,
right.
Representation, iteration, sharing, the use of the tools of the ethnographic medium as a mechanism to do some of those things. Absolutely. Were you in the class where the person went to the strip club? That's probably my favorite one of all time.
No, but that'd be interesting too.
It was super interesting.
Well, but do you think too, like, it's been a while since that class, and I still remember all this stuff, and it was meaningful, right? It was a meaningful experience. So
I appreciate that.
All right. So this is the beginning of the book tour, and this is going to go live tomorrow. My birthday is tomorrow. This is going live tomorrow. So it's going to be live.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. All right. So I was just, again, this is an early present for me. So I appreciate it. So where's the book tour going from here?
Well, thanks to COVID, we're not totally sure.
Okay.
I will be doing a virtual book event through A Room of One's Own, which is Madison's, finest local bookstore.
Yes.
That will be on November 10th.
Okay.
And I'll be in conversation with a woman named Ali Muldrow, who is a local activist and current president of the Madison Metropolitan School District School Board.
Nice.
So Ali and I will be in conversation, and because it's a virtual event, anyone can join. And on my website, which I believe is now ericahalverson.com, we're going to keep up with events there. So if folks want to follow along at home, they can see as events become available. We're working on a tour of arts centers throughout Wisconsin. So I'm hoping to be able to get to all of the places in Wisconsin that have thriving art scenes, which are actually quite a few, which is great, despite the total lack of federal and state support for the arts in the state of Wisconsin. Excuse me. And hoping to get to New York. Southern California. I'll be at UC Irvine in February. So I'm hoping to do some things around that. And my alma mater, Northwestern, I'm hoping to be able to announce when I'll be in the Chicago area.
So if we post on Erica Halverson, I'll post a link to your website and then people can check in there. But we'll also, like, if there's a sign up for the virtual one on November 10th, we'll post a link to that there too. So all in the show notes. So again, Erica, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the book, putting out and taking the risk, putting it out into the world. And now we get to take up those ideas, think about them, and think about how they can apply to our own teaching.
That's great. Thank you so much, Joel.
I'm just so blown away. One, that I got to have a conversation. It's been a while since I've talked to Erica, and I spent a lot of time in classrooms, again, or in her office, talking about ideas and things about, what could a dissertation even look like. And again, she thinks deeply about this stuff and treats your ideas like you're making art, like what we talked about, and like treats it as such, and with honor and respect, but also knows that she wants it to be the best representation it can be, right? Just like Rich asked her to rewrite something, she asked me to rewrite things as well. And I'm just very thankful for her, and thankful for what she's putting out into the world, and just encourage everyone, if you want to think deeply about these ideas, I would suggest getting this book. So that's all. I'm going to end there. So if you want, again, links are in the show notes. The show notes can be found at amazonplanet.com/episode 57. And if you're looking for ways to support the podcast and you like what you hear on this podcast, here's how you can support me. Here's a birthday present you can give to me. Rate the podcast, review the podcast, share the podcast. It'd be cool if we saw a spike in the listens for this episode, especially given some of the ideas that Erica's talking about. Just excited again for her to put that book out there. Let's acknowledge that she's taking a risk and putting things out there. So go ahead, share it on social media, share it. There's links to share it on anywhere where you get podcasts. You hit the little box with the arrow in it. That's a way to share it. So you send it to somebody. You can send them a text message. You can send it an email. Go ahead. Or if there's other episodes that you'd want to share, go ahead and share those as well. I'm putting links to the one I did with Gloria Latson Billings in the show notes, because that one was also pretty cool. And again, Erica's building on some of those ideas here. Anyway, those will all be in the show notes as well. But anyway, if you're looking for, oh man, what do I get Joel for his birthday? Hey, subscribe to the podcast, rate the podcast, review the podcast, share the podcast. That'd be great. You can also subscribe to the I'm on a Planet download. Again, we haven't been doing too much with that lately. But if you join the email list when that does get going again, doing some rethinking there, some reimagining, thinking about how best to use that platform. But anyway, you sign up for that. You can go to AmazonPlanet.com, hit one of those join the email list buttons, and it'll be there. You can also follow at Amazon Planet on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, or like the Amazon Planet Facebook page. That also works as well. And you can also check out the Amazon Planet store, Amazon Planet bookshop. Links are in the footer at AmazonPlanet.com. We've got some of that Be the Good shirts, hoodies, stuff like that, even coffee cups. You can get those, and all those production costs, all those purchases support the production costs of the podcast. So thank you for listening to this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. Thank you to Erica for spending some time on Amazon Planet. Love that she mentioned that in her intro there. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. And finally, thank you to all of you out there who are seeking to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place. It is, because you have decided to use the gifts you've been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.